Call to order. Newcastle County Council, March 11, 2014, 6:30 meeting. Please stand for a moment of silence. Thank you. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. Bell? Here. Mr. Bullock?
Here.
Mr. Cartier?
Here.
Ms. Diller?
Here.
Mr. Hollins?
Here.
Ms. Kilpatrick?
Here.
Mr. Powers?
Here.
Mr. Retta?
Here.
Mr. Sheldon?
Here.
Mr. Smiley?
Here.
Mr. Street? Mr. Tackett? Here. Mr. Weiner?
Here.
Mr. President, the roll call reveals 12 present, 1 absent.
Approval of minutes. Are there any corrections or amendments to the meeting of February 25th, 2014?
Motion to approve is distributed.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Minutes are hereby approved. Any announcements from members of council tonight? Councilmember Smiley.
Yes, Mr. President, I had stated earlier my intentions, I believe it was a couple of weeks ago, I lost track of time, but I want to be clear and place this on the record. Council is being filmed this evening at the courtesy of Councilman Weiner, understanding based on his previous statements that is being paid for by his political fund, his campaign account. With that, I just want to go on the record that my participation this evening, none of my comments, actions, or anything theretofore should be misinterpreted as an endorsement of his political campaign or anyone else's. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smiley. Any other announcements? Seeing none, introduction of ordinances. Madam Clerk, please call with the introduction of ordinances.
We have none.
We have none. We move on now to committee reports. We'll start with Mr. Cartier, Finance.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of council. At today's administrative finance committee meeting, we had an agenda, nothing on our consent calendar. Under other resolutions, we had 3 purchase order contracts, one originating for the Department of Community Services, one for the Office of Technology, one for Department of Administration. Under ordinances, we have a change to the grants budget, which I'll discuss with more program money coming from the Neighborhood Stabilization Program, which is a HUD program. We also entertained and passed a travel request by Councilman Hollins to attend a community planning conference. We looked at possible changes to our billing practices brought forward by Councilmember Diller. We approved 3 mini grants and adjourned the meeting.
Thank you, Councilman. Special Services,
Yes, sir.
Councilmember Sheldon.
Thank you, Mr. President. On Tuesday, March 4th at 1:30 on the 8th floor, we had a PowerPoint presentation and also an in-depth presentation of 3 parks in Newcastle County in which the county exec is moving his vision forward and special services at Glasgow Park, Carousel Park, and Rockwood Museum, that would go to bond at approximately $18 million.
Thank you, Councilmember. Land use. Councilmember Tackett, land use, please. If you're ready. Not, I can come back to you.
I'm ready.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr.
Yeah,
President. Tuesday, March 4th, 3 o'clock, the Land Use Committee met upstairs. We discussed one resolution that'll be on for consideration tonight. We also have some additional information that was distributed by Eileen Fogarty, the Land Use Manager, and given at the appropriate time tonight, I will ask them to speak, probably just on that topic.
Thank you. Councilmember Street has joined us for tonight. Personnel Committee.
Thank you,
Councilmember Sheldon.
Mr. President.
Yes.
It's been a busy week for me.
Yes.
Yes, the personnel actually has a continuance. We didn't have a quorum, but we discussed upcoming handbook regulation changes, which we're pursuing.
Thank you. This afternoon, in executive meeting, we interviewed candidates for County Community Service Board and Audit Committee. We tabled pending legislation and discussed the value of ethics in county government. And we went into executive session to discuss pending legal matters pursuant to the county. Public safety? Public safety?
Yes, Mr. President.
Councilmember Street?
The Public Safety Committee met today at 3:00, and we discussed, we had an update on the regional community meetings with both community services and our police department. We had a presentation and an update on the police division as it relates to property crime initiatives. We had an upgrade on the fleet vehicles, and we had a report on the K-9 unit. We also had a presentation in regard to about our emergency communications division.
Thank you, Councilmember, and we welcome you back in your capacity as co-chair of public safety. Moving on to consent calendar. Any member of the council or the public may remove an item from the consent calendar for further discussion by a simple request. If an item is not removed, it would not be subject to amendment, discussion, or other objection, and will be voted upon as a package. Consent calendar items are noted on the agendas as such and published in the newspaper, and they are available in the back of the room. Is there anyone from council or the public who wishes to have an item removed at this time? We will have 3 items that will remain on the table. Thank you, council to council duly. Is there a motion to approve the consent calendar?
So moved.
Second. All in favor? Aye. Ayes have it. Madam Clerk, please proceed with the reading of the consent calendar.
Resolution 14066, honoring the life and legacy of Mr. John Henry Johnson.
Madam Clerk, please call the roll on the consent calendar.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mr. Bullock?
Yes.
Mr. Cartier?
Yes.
Ms. Diller?
Yes.
Mr. Hollins? Yes. Ms. Kilpatrick?
Yes.
Mr. Powers?
Yes.
Mr. Retta?
Yes.
Mr. Sheldon?
Yes.
Mr. Smiley?
Yes.
Mr. Street?
Yes.
Mr. Tackett?
Yes.
Mr. Weiner?
Yes.
Mr. President, roll call reveals 13 yes.
The consent calendar has been passed. Thank you. Presentations, council, are there any presentations tonight from council members? Seeing none, we'll move to consideration of resolutions removed from the consent calendar. Other resolutions. R14-067. Mr. Tackett.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Yes.
Madam Clerk, would you please read into the record and present to council for consideration and adoption 067?
Resolution 14067.
Second.
Oh,
Anybody?
sorry.
Just a second. Someone,
Sorry.
Resolution 14067.
you usually second.
Plainville,
know.
Lakewood Village, Pencader, 100 north and south sides of Raybold Road, 0.25 mile east of Sunset Lake Road, subdivision of 164.59 acres into a 209 lot development of townhouses with 134.14 acres of open space, ST zoning.
Mr. Tackett.
Thank you, Mr. President. At this time, the applicant has distributed some additional information, the questions that came up from council. We had a presentation upstairs, so there's probably no need to have the applicant review what happened in the land use committee meeting, but they could review, I will ask them to review the information that was disseminated through email a little earlier this evening.
Good evening, Mr. President, members of council.
Yes.
My name is Samuel Fabrizio. I'm an attorney in Wilmington. I represent the owner-developer, Whitecap.com LLC. The engineer is Landmark Engineering, Keith Rudy. He's in this audience if we need any questions from him. As Councilman Tackett indicated, we went through this in detail last week at workshop. The pertinent changes since last week is note number 38. It has been corrected to reflect $100,320 as the homeowner assessment maintenance fee that has to be paid by the developer at the time of the turnover of the private open space. Last week, it was 1/2 the amount. It was just a mathematical calculation that was incorrect. Another question that was asked last week was with respect to the 53 plus or minus acres of public open space provided by the plan, what would be the annual maintenance cost to be paid by Newcastle County to maintain that space? Jonathan Husband this week sent an email to Special Services. He did the calculation, and it's approximately $1,150 per year. there are all the corrections that occurred this week. If there, and the Department of Land Use recommended the plan last week, other than those two minor changes. Mr. Weiner.
Mr. Weiner?
Thank you. Mr. Fabrizio,
Sure.
just my standard question. First, what would be the transit availability for residents? Buses?
Let's see, on Route 72, which is right outside of Rybold Road there, yes, there is bus service right there along the corridor going into Newark and going south from there.
Great, thank you. And my second question is, are there walkways within the development and on the main road in front of the development?
There is what's called a multimodal path that runs the entire length of Rybold Road on the north side, part of which is along the right-of-way, part of which goes through private open space and public open space.
And just for the record, for those that may not be familiar, would you explain the multimodal if you know?
Multimodal means it's 10 foot wide, first of all, okay? And the multimodal means you can use any type of vehicular service other than motor vehicles themselves, bicycles, other small vehicles of that nature, walking trail. You can use it as walking trail, but it is 10 feet wide.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments for the applicant?
I'm gonna have a question, but
Councilman Powers?
I have a question, but I don't think it's to him.
Okay.
It may be more with, I guess, Steve Fox.
Is Steve Fox here?
I know what your question is going to be. I may be able to help.
Yeah, well, part of what it shows, and I'll bring it up right now, is the maintenance. It says open space maintenance annual budget. There's a major thing, probably a few of us that have maintenance corps that's not into this, is the liability insurance. And I can tell you, most of the ones I have about 100 acres, the liability insurance is about 27,000 a year, so that adds another 13,000 to it. So, I mean, first thing that is said that I asked their engineer is he's not an insurance agent, he can't figure that out. But that's part of a major part of these fees. I mean, it's a lot of money on my constituents to have to pay for liability insurance, and we're not even showing this in the beginning. So you got a $240 lot fee that is probably going to be higher than that by the time you add the liability, because anybody can walk on this property and that maintenance corp's liable for it.
Yeah, but just remember one thing. First of all, I can't tell you what the insurance costs would be. And insurance costs are always determined by with respect to the liability that's going to be there. Keep in mind, this project does not have any recreational facilities. No swimming pools, no swings, no seesaws, none of that type of thing. So the insurance costs would be very minimal in relation to a number like you're saying, I think 27,000. But here's the other point. The open space is not turned over to the association until the 90th percentile building permit is issued, at which time the developer also transfers to the association that $100,320 check. At that point in time, as I said, the HOA account is funded with $100,000. At that point in time, it is then up to the HOA to pick up insurance. Between now and that time, it'll be on the developer.
I understand.
So when it does that-
I understand that.
Okay, well, when it
Because
does,
I have a lot of subdivisions
Okay.
in my,
okay,
I understand that. And the reason I ask it is after going through a lot of these budgets, it's a big part of their budget.
Okay.
You know, if they've got a $200,000 thing, they got a 30,000 liability insurance. I understand what you're saying, but some of the ones I have just have this exact same thing you're talking about, and it's at least 13,000. I mean, some of the lowest ones have been that much. Now, if they're down to 15 acres or, not that big of a subdivision, I mean, here, your total acreage is, 100 and some acres.
164 acres, but
Yeah.
most of it is,
Going to the
forested
county, which
area
would be
and
on our
wetland.
liability.
if you look at the south side of Rybold Road, it's almost unwalkable land area.
But something good happened. Don't ever say never.
Your point's well taken, absolutely.
Any other questions or
I-
comments?
I just, if we're not looking at that, we ought to figure out what it is, because if that's how it was done on Bayberry and saying the average was gonna be $1,300 a year for maintenance for the open space, what's the liability gonna be on that one? And that's a 13-month mortgage payment on all those houses. That won't happen until it gets turned over, as you said, but it becomes a financial burden to whoever's gonna be here at the time.
Any other questions?
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Any public comment? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mr. Bullock?
Yes.
Mr. Cartier?
Yes.
Ms. Diller?
Yes.
Mr. Hollins? Yes. Ms. Kilpatrick?
Yes.
Mr. Powers?
Yes.
Mr. Retta?
Yes.
Mr. Sheldon?
Yes.
Mr. Smiley?
Yes.
Mr. Street? Yes. Mr. Tackett?
Yes.
Mr. Weiner?
Yes.
Mr. President, the roll call reveals 13 yes.
R 14-067 is approved. R 14-068, Mr. Cartier.
Thank you, Mr. President. Like Resolution 14-068, read by title only, and placed before council for its consideration.
Second.
Resolution 14068, authorizing the execution of one purchase order contract for the Department of Community Services for an increase to the pass-through grant in the amount of $27,451, making the new totals $152,451.
Mr. Cartier.
Yes, Mr. President, this purchase order is in the amount of $27,451 to go to Family Help, Inc., to help in their project that we reviewed in Community Services. Has to do with enhancements to the building that's being renovated to accommodate a homeless shelter. And that is the substance of the resolution, purchase order contract 14-068.
Thank you, Mr. Cartier. Council, do you have any questions or comments on this particular resolution? Any public comment? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, please call.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mr. Bullock?
Yes.
Mr. Cartier?
Yes.
Ms. Diller?
Yes.
Mr. Hollins? Ms. Kilpatrick?
Yes.
Mr. Powers?
Yes.
Mr. Retta?
Yes.
Mr. Sheldon?
Yes.
Mr. Smiley?
Yes.
Mr. Street?
Yes.
Mr. Tackett?
Yes.
Mr. Weiner?
Yes.
President, roll call reveals 13 yes.
R 14-068 is approved. R 14-069, Mr. Cartier.
Yes, Mr. President, like resolution number 14-069, read by title only and placed before council for its consideration.
Second.
Resolution 14069, authorizing the execution of one purchase order contract to Oracle America, Inc. for systems analyst training for the Office of Technology in the amount of $8,400.
Mr. Cartier?
Yes, resolution 14-069 is another purchase order contract in the amount of $8,400 that is going to the Office of Technology, Department of Administration. It has to do with training to use our software package provided by Oracle America Incorporated, which includes PeopleSoft and these other software packages, programs that we use in the county to manage personnel and other aspects of county operations. And this is a training budget amount to get our personnel up to speed working on this Oracle America software.
Thank you, Mr. Cartier. Mr. Weiner?
Yes, I just have one related question. If there's anyone from IS department, if they could tell us when they're going to launch the new county platform website?
Is a representative from the administration? I see our Chief Administrative Officer, Mr. Grimaldi. Would you please come?
CEO David Grimaldi. The new county website is going to be rolled out this week, and the new GIS mapping is going to also be rolled out with the new website this week.
I'm excited, and for those that had a chance to see the technology committee meeting, it shows an example of what it looks like and how users can use it. So thank you very much. Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Grimaldi. Thank you, Mr. Weiner. Any other comments or questions? Public comment. Seeing none, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mr. Bullock?
Yes.
Mr. Cartier?
Yes.
Ms. Diller?
Yes.
Mr. Hollins? Yes. Ms. Kilpatrick?
Yes.
Mr. Powers? Mr. Retta?
Yes.
Mr. Sheldon?
Yes.
Mr. Smiley?
Yes.
Mr. Street?
Yes.
Mr. Tackett?
Yes.
Mr. Weiner?
Yes.
Mr. President, the roll call reveals 12 yes, 1 absent.
R 14-069 is approved. R 14-070, Mr. Cartier.
Yes, Mr. President, like resolution number 14-070, read by title only and placed before council for its consideration and adoption.
Second.
Resolution 14070, authorizing the execution of one purchase order contract with the Department of Administration for professional grant writing consulting services in the amount of $25,000.
Mr. Cartier.
Yes, this $25,000 purchase order through the Department of Administration, will go to a consultant vendor, National Institute for Integrated Family Service Incorporated, to write grants. We have some grant writing apparently is resulting grants from these folks going to our PAL Center and other aspects seemingly concentrated mostly in public safety. And the amount is $25,000 to National Institute for Integrated Family Services, I said.
Thank you, council member. Any comments or questions? Public comment. Seeing none, Madam Clerk, please call.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mr. Bullock?
Yes.
Mr. Cartier?
Yes.
Ms. Diller?
Yes.
Mr. Hollins? Yes. Ms. Kilpatrick?
Yes.
Mr. Powers? Mr. Retta?
Yes.
Mr. Sheldon?
Yes.
Mr. Smiley?
Yes.
Mr. Street? Yes. Mr. Tackett?
Yes.
Mr. Weiner?
Yes.
Mr. President, roll call reveals 12 yes, 1 absent.
R 14-070 is approved. R 14-071, Mr. Smiley.
Yes, Mr. President, I request R 14-071 be read by title only and placed before council for its consideration.
Second.
Resolution 14071, appointing Sharita Perkins to the Newcastle County Audit Committee.
Mr. Smiley,
As per title.
comments or questions? Public comment. Seeing none, Madam Clerk, please call.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mr. Bullock?
Yes.
Cartier?
Yes.
Diller?
Yes.
Mr. Hollins? Yes. Ms. Kilpatrick?
Yes.
Mr. Powers? Mr. Retta?
Yes.
Mr. Sheldon?
Yes.
Mr. Smiley?
Yes.
Mr. Street? Yes. Mr. Tackett?
Yes.
Mr. Weiner?
Yes.
Mr. President, the roll call reveals 12 yes, 1 absent.
R 14-071 is approved. R 14-027, Mr. Weiner.
Yes, I ask that Resolution 14-027 be read by title only,
Excuse me.
placed before council.
Question?
Mr. Smiley.
Mr. Weiner, is it your intent to leave it on the table?
You
Yes.
leave-
I
you
don't think
table
we
it.
need to do any
We
of
don't
it.
need to go through it.
It's tabled.
It's already
Point of
tabled.
order.
Thank you. Yes. Remains as is, tabled.
Thank you.
Thank you. R 14-028, again, Mr. Weiner,
Remains on the table.
as is. R 14-063, Mr. Bell.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that Resolution 14-063 be removed from the table.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Ayes have it.
Mr. President, I move
Mr.
that
Bell.
Resolution 14-063 be read by title only and placed before council for its consideration and adoption.
Resolution 14063, appointing Cecily M. Nixon to the Newcastle County Department of Community Services Board.
Mr. Bell,
As per title, Mr. President.
comments or questions of council? Public comment. Seeing none, Madam Clerk, please call.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mr. Bullock?
Yes.
Mr. Cartier?
Yes.
Diller?
Yes.
Mr. Hollins? Yes. Ms. Kilpatrick?
Yes.
Mr. Powers?
Yes.
Mr. Retta?
Yes.
Mr. Sheldon?
Yes.
Mr. Smiley?
Yes.
Mr. Street? Yes. Mr. Tackett?
Yes.
Mr. Weiner?
Yes.
Mr. President, the roll call reveals 13 yes.
Thank you. We'll now move on to ordinances. R 14-063, I'm sorry, is approved. Now, let's move on to ordinances. Ordinance 14-020, Mr. Weiner.
Yes, I ask that 14-020 be read by title, and then I'll intend to table it.
Second.
Ordinance 14020 to amend Newcastle County Code Chapter 2 Administration concerning county attorney or designee approval of executive branch generated legislation as to legality.
Yes,
Mr. Weiner.
Yes, Mr. President, this legislation requires the signature of the county attorney or his department indicating the legality of legislation before the ordinance or resolution from the executive branch of government would be coming over to our legislative branch. Because I intend to speak to the county attorney and to the county executive, I intend to table it until a further council meeting.
Second.
Is there a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Hereby table. Thank you, Mr. Weiner. Ordinance 14-003, status tabled. Mr. Weiner?
Yes, I ask that this ordinance be read by title only, and then I intend to table it.
Excuse me, Mr. President.
We skip one? Which one I skipped? I'm sorry?
21.
Sorry, Mr. Pro Tem. Ordinance 14-021, Mr. Hollins.
Thanks.
Ms. Diller?
Yes, I'm asking that ordinance 14-021 be read by title only and placed before council for its consideration and adoption.
Ordinance 14021, amend the grants budget, appropriate $350,000 in anticipated program income to the Neighborhood Stabilization Program grant and realign $335,515.99 of program income in the Neighborhood Stabilization Program grant to provide funding for the purchase and rehabilitation of eligible homes and residential properties in Newcastle County.
Councilmember Diller.
Yes, the only thing I would add is, as we discussed in our committee meeting this afternoon, these funds, the NSP funds originate with HUD, but otherwise per title.
Thank you. Council, you have any comments or questions? Public comment. Seeing none, Madam Clerk, please call.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mr. Bullock?
Yes.
Mr. Cartier?
Yes.
Diller?
Yes.
Mr. Holland? Yes. Ms. Kilpatrick?
Yes.
Mr. Powers?
Yes.
Mr. Retta?
Yes.
Mr. Sheldon?
Yes.
Mr. Smiley?
Yes.
Mr. Street?
Yes.
Mr. Tackett?
Yes.
Mr. Weiner?
Yes.
Mr. President, the roll call reveals 13 yes.
Ordinance 14-021 is approved. Now, ordinance 14-003, Mr. Weiner.
Yes, I ask that it be read by title only, and then I intend to table.
It's already
tabled.
It's already tabled.
Thank you.
It's tabled as such. Substitute number one, ordinance 14-006. I believe this is Mr. Smiley.
Yes, Mr. President, I would request that ordinance 14-006, substitute 1 thereto, be read by title only and placed before council for consideration.
Second.
Substitute number 1 to ordinance 14-006 to amend Newcastle County Code Chapter 2 Administration Division 2.03.100, the Code of Ethics regarding definitions and statements of financial interests.
Mr. Smiley?
Yes, Mr. President. This ordinance was sent over from the Ethics Commission, introduced, and then referred back to the Ethics Commission, as is the procedure. This substitute and ordinance would expand the definition of the section of the Code of Ethics in order to provide further guidance for officials and employees who are required to file a statement of financial interest. In addition, it expands, excuse me, it expands the requirements and the provisions of who has to report and what.
Thank you, Mr. Smiley. Comments or questions from council? Mr. Weiner?
Yes, Mr. President, I'm pleased that Council President and myself
Yes.
are co-sponsors with Councilman Smiley. Having participated in most of the workshops, it's a credit to the leadership of our council, to the attorney, to the Ethics Board, Ethics Commission for having given us guidance as we went through about 8 different meetings, and the public will be well served should this be adopted.
Thank you, Councilmember Smiley.
In addition, just as further clarification for those that will be reviewing this, a piece of legislation, these new reporting parameters take effect next year for the next reporting period. The computer system has to be reworked. Things have to be, training has to take place for new employees. So that's when it will take effect if passed and signed.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions from council? Public comment? Please state your name, please. You have 3 minutes.
Good evening.
Good evening.
William Dunn, Civic League for Newcastle County. I find myself me personally find myself in a unique situation where I'm in complete agreement with Mr. Smiley.
I think I might have to table this for further review.
Yes, based on issues that have come up over the past 15, 20 years, I think it is well-deserved that we have a revision to the rules and regulations. And from my read-through a number of times, I think it is a step that will make a significant difference in how things get reported and handled within county government and raise the level of ethical responsibility amongst the people that work for the county and represent the county. So I very much appreciate and support the ordinance and look forward to its implementation. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Dunn. Any other public comment? Seeing none, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mr. Bullock?
Yes.
Mr. Cartier?
Yes.
Diller?
Yes.
Mr. Hollins?
Yes.
Ms. Kilpatrick?
Yes.
Mr. Powers?
Yes.
Mr. Retta?
Yes.
Mr. Sheldon?
Yes.
Mr. Smiley?
Yes.
Mr. Street?
Yes.
Mr. Tackett?
Yes.
Mr. Weiner?
Yes.
President, the roll call reveals 13 yes.
Substitute number one, ordinance 14-006 is approved. Ordinance 14-007, Mr. Smiley.
Yes, Mr. President, I would move to lift ordinance 14-007 from the table.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Ayes have it. Mr. Smiley,
Okay,
continue.
I would request that ordinance 14-007 be read by title only and placed before council for its consideration.
Ordinance 14007 to amend Newcastle County Code, Chapter 2, Administration, Article 3, Officers and Employees regarding the Code of Conduct section of the Newcastle County Code of Ethics.
Mr. Smiley.
Yes, this ordinance requires any county employer official who has a financial interest in any private enterprise which is subject to the regulatory jurisdiction of or does business with Newcastle, with the county department, to file said information with the county human resources office instead of with the ethics commission. It just changes the reporting so that it will now be in a place where the other information is, so that if there's a conflict, it would be more readily noticeable.
Thank you. Comments or questions? Councilmember Weiner?
Thank you, Mr. President.
Yes.
Again, I'd like to note that I appreciate having your sponsorship as well as mine joining
Yes.
Councilman Smiley. And just for additional clarification, this really avoids potential conflicts of interest since it's the Human Resources Office in the first instance that would have the database necessary to do a cross-review.
Thank you for that comment, Mr. Weiner. Any other comments or questions from council? Seeing none, public comment. Seeing none, Madam Clerk, please call.
Mr. Bell?
Yes.
Mr. Bullock?
Yes.
Mr. Cartier?
Yes.
Ms. Diller?
Yes.
Mr. Hollins? Yes. Ms. Kilpatrick?
Yes.
Mr. Powers?
Yes.
Mr. Retta?
Yes.
Mr. Sheldon?
Yes.
Mr. Smiley?
Yes.
Mr. Street?
Yes.
Mr. Tackett?
Yes.
Mr. Weiner?
Yes.
Mr. President, the roll call reveals 13 yes.
Ordinance 14-007 is approved. Anything on the item J? K? L? Any public comment tonight? Councilmember Cartier?
Thank you, Mr. President.
Yes.
I'll be very brief. I guess we all saw in the Sunday paper the really disturbing news about the huge increase in food stamp utilization across the state. Sadly, in my council district, the zip code 19809 recorded the greatest increase in the use of food stamps from 2003, over 1,800%. Those statistics that we were looking at show how the lingering effects of this Great Recession continue to this day, are not abating. In fact, we're watching our population in the county and across the state, huge sectors of it, having very great difficulty even feeding themselves. And I got to tell you, when I read that, specifically with reference to my council district, it was shocking to me. And we've got to do a lot more in state and county government to really come up with policies and ways so we can turn this around. Most Delawareans are hardworking people. They take pride in work. There's just not enough of it to go around. So I just wanted to go on record saying I read that very disturbing article. It was a very good article in the sense of illuminating this growing crisis of basic food provision for people. And it was shocking to me. And it just shows that we are very far away from recovering from this recession.
Thank you, Councilmember Cartier. Any other public comment or
Motion
comment
to
from
adjourn.
council?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting's done. Thank you so much.